Here we go. We're going to solve this inequality by using the steps that I talked about in the previous video. First thing I want to do is get all the terms over to one side of the inequality. So I'm going to subtract this 8 over x minus 2 to bring it to the other side. It'll look like this. X minus 8 over x minus 2. Now it'll be less than 0. So if I subtract that, the right side becomes 0. Now I'm going to simplify and factor this side. So I need to get a common denominator over here. So I'm going to multiply this expression by x minus 2 over x minus 2. That'll give me a common denominator. I can put things together there. So this expression now becomes x squared minus 2x all over x minus 2. This stays the same. Minus 8 over x minus 2 is less than 0. I can put those together now because I have a common denominator. So when you do that, it'll look like this. It'll be x squared minus 2x minus 8 all over x minus 2. That's less than 0. I can factor the numerator there, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. When I do that, I get x plus 2 times x minus 4. It's still all over x minus 2. Less than 0. Okay, at this point I'm going to figure out what values make my inequality equal 0 or make it undefined, and I'm going to place those values on a number line. So let me get that down here. Number line. Values that make this go to 0 are going to be negative 2, 4, and positive 2 would make it undefined. So those are my three numbers that I got to place here. So we got negative 2, 4, and positive 2. So let's put those in order here on the number line. We'll do negative 2, that'll be negative 1, 0, 1, positive 2. And then we got 4, so 2, 3, 4. On each end of my number line, I'll put positive infinity on the positive side, negative infinity on the negative side. So I'm going to look at each of my factors here that make up my expression, and I'm going to pick test values in each of these intervals, and I'm going to look at each individual factor and then kind of put it together to see, I want this expression to be negative, okay, because it says it's less than 0. So I'm going to look at each of these parts that make up my expression and see what kind of sign I'm going to get when I actually would do this operation. So I'm going to kind of list here off to the side each of these factors. So I have x plus 2, I have x minus 4, and I have x minus 2. And I'll write in each interval here whether they're positive or negative. And then here at the bottom I'll do like the whole expression. And here I'll just write whole inequality. Okay, so I want to plug in a value between negative 2 and negative infinity. So you can try negative 3. And you can just do this in your head. When I plug negative 3 into x minus 2, I get a negative number out. So I'm just going to put a little negative sign there. When I put negative 3 in here, I get a negative number out. So I'm going to put another negative. When I put negative 3 in here, I get a negative number out. Okay, so what you're going to be doing here is you'll have the top two here, you're going to be multiplying. So negative times a negative is a positive, but then you're dividing by a negative. So that's going to give you a negative for the whole inequality there. So that's what we want. We want that to be negative. We want it to be less than 0. So I'm going to put a little check mark above that interval because that interval satisfies our inequality. Over here, I'm going to test a value between negative 2 and 2. 0 is a good one to pick. It's easy to plug in. You can see that if you plug 0 in here, this will be positive. If you plug 0 in here, this will be negative. If you plug 0 in here, this will be negative. Okay. Now when I would do this operation, I do a positive times a negative. That would give me a negative. But then if I divide by a negative, it's back to positive. So the whole thing is positive. I don't want a positive number. It says here I have to be less than 0. So this doesn't work. I'll put an x over that interval. On the next interval between 2 and 4, I'll plug in 3 and I'll do the same thing again. Okay. So when I plug 3 in there, that would be a positive number there. When I plug 3 in here, this will be a negative number. When I plug 3 in there, that would be a positive number. So there I have positive times a negative is negative. and then divided by a positive. So you'll have a negative divided by a positive. That's going to be negative. And that's what I want. I want a negative value. So again, this interval works. Between 2 and 4 works. I got one last interval here between 4 and infinity. I'll plug in 5. If I plug in 5, this is going to be positive. If I plug in 5, this is going to be positive. If I plug in 5, this will also be positive. So you got all positive there, so that's going to end up being positive. We don't want positive, so that interval doesn't work. So you can see on your number line which values are going to satisfy this inequality. And all you got to do then is just kind of list those out. And that'll be your answer. I'm going to list them in interval notation here. So I know that between negative infinity and negative 2, I'm sorry, here, negative infinity and negative 2 will give me, any of those values will satisfy this inequality. And then we jump over to between 2 and 4, so I'm going to put a little union sign there, and the values between 2 and 4. Okay, we're not including our endpoints here because we have strictly less than. If we had a less than or equal to sign, we would want to make sure we check to make sure that these values do indeed work in there. So this is my answer. Okay, the values that satisfy that inequality are between negative infinity and negative 2, and then any of the values from 2 to 4 are going to work. So that's it. Here you can try one on your own and check with me in class to see if you got it. Here's one to try. X is less than 2 over x minus 1. The steps is very similar to the one I just did. See if you can do it on your own.